Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm Jack Hagel. On Saturday, North Carolina Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson entered the 2024 gubernatorial race. His announcement launched what will be a closely watched GOP primary battle. The big question Robinson's opponents and some of his supporters will ask, is he too extreme for moderate North Carolinians? WRAL state government reporter Will Doran was at Robinson's campaign kickoff. Will, long before Saturday, Robinson called his plans to run for governor the worst-kept secret in North Carolina politics. Now it's out of the bag.
It is.
So for listeners who don't know Mark Robinson, go check out our episode titled The Many Layers of Mark Robinson. It aired in September. But Will, just give us the Cliff's Notes. Who is Mark Robinson?
So he came to political fame, not the common way that you often see politicians rise up, but from a viral video that in 2018 talking about gun rights. And that propelled him to become in 2020 the first black lieutenant governor in North Carolina history. Really one of few very prominent black Republicans in state history. And now he's got a chance to be the state's first black governor. His comments are, one, what has made him so popular. He's a really compelling speaker. He often tends to get a little extreme in some of his remarks, especially on more social issues. And that is what you mentioned earlier has some of his supporters and also opponents, of course, worried, or in the case of opponents, maybe happy about his chances in a general election. He's been compared a lot to Donald Trump, the former Republican president. They are both have, a huge presence on stage. This rally, was very much like a Trump rally in a lot of ways that we saw on Saturday.
Set the scene for us. What did it look like there?
Sure. Well, you had hundreds of people, a lot of them decked out in, not necessarily MAGA hats or shirts, but, his color scheme that he's using for his campaign is that exact same, what everyone knows, the bright red background with white lettering. He had a race car, it was at Ace Speedway, which is a racetrack, and he had a race car there that said Mark Robinson for governor on it. There were, dozens of American flags all around the stage, huge red banners everywhere. There was a guy wearing an Uncle Sam costume, the big Star-Spangled Top hat and everything. Just anyone who's ever been to a Trump rally, even if you weren't here on Saturday, you know exactly what it was like. Even down to the playlist. I've covered a lot of Trump rallies, and he played, probably at least half the songs that I've also heard when I've covered the former president. And it poured rain, but I should say, again, a testament to Robinson's speaking skills. Hardly anybody left. People just pulled out their umbrellas, and, he even laughed it off. He said, "Oh, the devil must be mad at me," and just kept going.
And then there was the big moment. This big presence gets up and says, what? Who is the candidate that he wants us to see out of the gate?
So he really leans into his personal story, which is a great story. He grew up in extreme poverty. Single mom raised him. He talked about there were times that he wasn't sure if they were going to be homeless soon. He didn't know if he'd be sleeping in a shelter or not. And even as an adult, he has had financial struggles. He said he lost not one but two different jobs to NAFTA. Obviously, a lot of people who've worked in North Carolina's textiles industries or other manufacturing have similar stories. And he said, I relate to you guys. I'm not some politician who has spent years and years and years just climbing the ladder, trying to do and say all the right things, getting an Ivy League degree. He, in fact, only got his college degree a few months ago, and he's said, look, I'm an authentic North Carolinian. That's what people need. People don't need, a buttoned up politician. That's a little bit his way of, acknowledging that, maybe I'm a little bit rough around the edges, but, so are a lot of us. And, people don't necessarily want, someone who's super squeaky clean. He did steer clear of controversial statements in his speech. It was very heavily scripted. But again, he even joked about that. He kicked off the speech telling the crew on hand to turn off his teleprompter and that he wanted to go off script. And then he was like, no, I'm just kidding. I just wanted to give my campaign manager a heart attack there. So, he knows that his base loves when he does go off script and, says some of the more controversial things that he's made a name for. But right now he is being very carefully scripted, at least here in the kickoff.
Well, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll hear what other Republicans think of Robinson's bid for governor. Stick around. Welcome back to the WRAL Daily Download. We're talking with WRAL state government reporter Will Doran about the 2024 North Carolina governor's race. Well, in your coverage of this rally, you reported that a lot of big Republican leaders turned out to support Robinson. Who was there, and what does that tell you?
Yeah, so probably half of the state Senate GOP caucus was there, including state Senate leader Phil Berger, who's, arguably the most powerful politician in the state, and a number of other people, Congressman Dan Bishop, another prominent Republican, sent in a video message. You've got the party leadership in a lot of ways really lining up behind him, both figuratively and literally. They're all standing up there on the stage with him in a huge group of about 30 people.
And why is that significant? Wouldn't one expect GOP leaders to back the highest ranking Republican in the state?
Well, for one, Robinson's not the only person in this primary. And two, as we've mentioned, he does have these particularly extreme views on social issues, particularly his anti-gay stances on lots of things. And the party has been a little divided on whether or not to push him for this really high-profile role. Yes, he did win the 2020 lieutenant governor's race. And, he won it, the GOP primary, I think it was 8 or 9 people in it, and he won it easily. He really, really connects with the grassroots. But, that's the kind of race where, statewide, it doesn't get a ton of scrutiny in the general election just because, people are paying attention to the president and governor and Senate. They're not really paying attention to lieutenant governor. But, this is, now that he's running for governor, he's going to have a lot more scrutiny on him, a lot more people paying attention to the things he said in the past. And, they worry that his views could jeopardize the GOP's chances of taking the governor's office, by turning off suburban voters.
You mentioned that he's not the only Republican in the race. Who are the GOP alternatives?
So the other formally announced candidate right now is State Treasurer Dale Falwell. He was a longtime legislative leader, has been the treasurer since 2016. And talking to Republican insiders, they'll tell you, look, Falwell is every bit the authentic blue-collar guy that Mark Robinson is. They both actually have very similar stories of growing up in poverty and lifting themselves out of it. They say the difference is just Robinson is a generational talent, really, when, you put him on stage and put him in front of a microphone. Another potential candidate is Mark Walker, a Baptist minister from the Greensboro area, former U.S. congressman. I've been texting with him the past few days. He acknowledged that he's thinking about it. He said he's praying on it. People are reaching out to him, but he still hasn't, formally made up his mind. And really what you've heard from both Falwell and Walker is, we need a little bit more of a, adult voice in the race. That's a phrase that they've used. Someone who's going to talk to voters like they're grown-ups, can talk to them without being offensive, and, can argue for conservative points. Both of them are very conservative. They're not, milquetoast, middle-of-the-road kind of guys, but they say, we can talk to people in a non-offensive way, get our points across in a way that's not going to turn people off and potentially lose an election.
Would they even stand a chance against Robinson? You mentioned that he did so well in his previous primary. Could Robinson or Falwell even put a dent in his vote count?
Honestly, it's going to be a tough battle for either of them to do that. And that's because Robinson's base of support is among two key groups, gun rights activists and Christian evangelicals. And right there, you've got the vast majority of who votes in a GOP primary. And you look at polling and that shows, Robinson polls at, well above 50%. No one else can really even clear 10%. It's his race to lose at this point. And then there's also just the money factor. Money is a huge part of politics. He's got, a multi-million-dollar campaign apparatus, and no one else really comes close to that.
Whoever wins the GOP nomination, how could they stack up against a Democrat in the general election?
Well, assuming that the polls are right and Robinson does win this race, he's probably going to be facing off against Democratic Attorney General Josh Stein. He's so far the only Democrat in the primary, and everyone expects him to win that primary. And their styles really couldn't be much more different, and their histories too. Stein has been in politics for a long time. He's a lawyer. He's really been working towards this moment for years. He's gone the same path that, Roy Cooper did before him. You serve in the state Senate, and then you become attorney general, then you run for governor. But he's also a little bit more like Roy Cooper in that, he's not going to, burn the house down at a speech, like Robinson might. And so, you have, really different personalities, really different records. This is not going to be a close decision for voters. You've got two very, very different candidates. But at the same time, Republicans are, the third smallest voting bloc in the state, followed by Democrats. And then key is the unaffiliated voters, people who haven't signed up for either political party. A lot of them because they're, kind of fed up with both parties, or maybe they like some things that one side says, but also like some things that the other side says. You hear a lot that your typical unaffiliated voter is a little bit more conservative on fiscal issues. They want their property taxes to be lower, but they're a little bit more liberal on social issues. They've got gay friends and family members. And so winning those voters and how they're going to lean, do they prefer Stein? Do they prefer Robinson? That's going to be, a huge question. We're a big state, over 10 million people, but the 2016 governor's race came down to 10,000 votes, just a very, very tiny percentage. So it's really on the margins that you got to fight for, just a few voters here and there to win a statewide race in North Carolina.
Well, I know you'll be keeping a close eye on it as this race heats up. Thanks, Will.
Thank you.
That's WRAL state government reporter Will Doran. For his in-depth analysis of the North Carolina governor's race, visit nccapital.com. I'm Jack Hagel. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for listening to the WRAL Daily Download and for making us part of your morning routine. Another great way to get WRAL news is the Morning Briefing newsletter. It's a daily email with Triangle news, events, and headlines to help you get ready for the day. Sign up at WRAL.com/newsletter.